Welcome to Speak Out. I'm Sandy Galiff, a member of the New York State Assembly representing parts of northern Westchester and parts of Putnam County. And today we're going to be talking about self-help and can self-help be dangerous to our lives? And I have two very special guests with me today that are going to give us a lot of insight into what happens in self-help and what we need to do ourselves. So first I'd like to introduce Virginia Brown, who's the founder of Seek Safely. And and she's also a private practice therapist. So we welcome you, Ginny.
Thank you.
And Kathleen Brady, who's a CPC, Certified Career Life Management Coach. And we welcome you too, Kathleen. And we're going to be talking a lot about self-help. And I know, Ginny, you've started to get a lot involved in self-help. Had you done this before you had the tragedy in your life? Had you been involved with looking at how individuals or groups try to help people? Had that been a part of therapy at all that you had been involved with before?
Well, as a licensed clinical social worker having a private practice and also doing a lot of educational work with families, I've always considered myself someone who was providing help and direction for others. And I've read many self-help books over the years, found them to be helpful, inspirational. So I was familiar with self-help from the consumer angle. And my daughter Kirby and I had attended a 2-day seminar with James Ray in March of 2009, and it was very interesting. It was interesting.
Who's James Ray?
He was an internationally known motivational speaker who was on Oprah 3 times on all the morning talk shows. He came into popularity after the release of the book The Secret, in which he was featured in the book and also in the DVD. And I believe his notoriety really took off after that.
And so once you went to hear him, and I love inspirational speakers. I have them that inspire me about government.
Right.
Not always, well, it could be self-help too, how to speak in front of an audience and things like that. But in this case, I think what happened is your daughter decided that she would go to an event that was sponsored by him. Is that what happened?
Yes, so she decided that it was an investment in her business, and she took actually her life savings and decided to invest in her business so that she would be more motivated to take the next level and to learn some personal things for herself. So she signed up for the Spiritual Warrior Retreat, which was 5 days in Sedona, Arizona in October of 2009. And at the end of that event, the culminating event was a sweat lodge. And it was in that sweat lodge that she lost her life. And we were shocked. How could you go to an event to expand your life and wind up losing it? It was unbelievable. So we wound up doing lots of investigation. And Kirby was just an amazing woman. She lived in San Jose del Cabo, had a decorative painting business. She mountain bike climbed, surfed the big waves, and she was very safety conscious. So we were really mystified as to how this could have happened to her. 2 other people also lost their lives. James Shaw lost his life. He actually dragged someone unconscious out of that tent in front of James Ray, and then went back to get Kirby, asked for help, and was ignored. Liz Newman died 9 days later.
So what was the sweat lodge for? It was a part of his program that he thought that it would show that you can achieve something in this way.
I think in self-help events, lots of times a physical challenge is seen as a metaphor for being able to overcome emotional and other kinds of challenges in your life. But the sweat lodge is intended to be a cleansing ceremony. It's actually a beautiful Native American tradition. And the Native Americans were very upset that he had misused their sacred ritual and turned it into a heat endurance contest. It's not intended to be used in that way. It's a low tent that's covered with breathable materials, and in the center of the area is a pit where hot rocks are placed and then water is thrown over it to create steam. So the experience is similar to a sauna, but he urged people to stay in even when they were feeling sick or uncomfortable or in distress. And he kept urging them to play full on, to give this their, work through their.
So this is a person that is, going around and trying to convince people to do different things, has a program, and there really isn't safety involved with that program. So what happens to an individual like this? You had the tragedy of your life as well as others there, and then so what happens to the provider of that service?
Well, in this particular case, the action was considered criminal, so he was prosecuted in Arizona. He was initially indicted for manslaughter and was convicted for negligent homicide in Arizona at the end of 2011. The trial lasted almost a year. It was on court TV. And for 3 deaths, he has served 20 months in prison and is now out. So what horrified us was that you could offer a physical challenge like that and have absolutely no medical support available. This was an expensive event, very professionally run, glitzy in terms of his presentation, but he had no risk management plan. He had nothing in place. He didn't even have cell reception from where this took place. Someone had to run in order to get 911, and he wasn't the one who called 911. When the police arrived on the scene, he was up showering and having dinner.
Kathleen, you've gotten to know each other since then?
Yes. Yes.
And so what is your involvement with Ginny now?
I signed the pledge that she talked about on Seek Safely, because as a career coach, you have to be mindful of your clients, and you always have to put your clients first. And there's a certain sense of personal ethics that I think people must be aware of what they're doing. And I think the pledge is sort of a simple way to remain conscious of what you're doing. I mean, it's a business. I have a business, so clearly there's absolutely nothing wrong with making money by offering people advice, but the personal ethics has to be do no harm. And you have to recognize when you're selling an expertise, when you're selling an opinion, when you're selling just an inspirational story. And there's a difference in all of those things. And as an expert, you have to be mindful of how people are hearing your message. It's frightening to me that anybody can declare themselves an expert right now, because everyone can self-publish a book and have their own blog, radio shows, and things like that. So they position themselves as an expert, and they have no real authority or understanding of some of these things. And I've even seen, in the coaching business now, which they are trying to regulate somewhat, anybody can call themselves a coach and give out advice. So there'll be someone who, well, I've lost 100 pounds, let me tell you how to do it. Well, it's different if I say, here's how I did it, and maybe this could work for you. And it's another thing to say, here's how I did it, this is what you should do.
Right.
When
and
you don't have all the
aren't
information.
necessarily a physician or whatever that can tell you that kind of thing. So the person that you and your daughter listened to and participated in a session, he was on Oprah. He was probably lifted up fairly high because of that kind of personality. Does that happen very often?
Well, I would have thought that Oprah's staff would have done the research to discover that the claims that he made on his training and background were false. But obviously they didn't. She has a staff to do that. I don't. So when you see someone on television, you see someone that's promoted on the morning shows as the up-and-coming great, motivational speaker, guru, you make an assumption that that person is credible, that that person is ethical. And I guess what we learned was that you can't make any assumptions, that it's really important to be aware of the fact that just because someone is vetted on national television or is in magazines or has had a book, it doesn't necessarily mean that what they're saying is correct, honest.
So how does an average person deal with that? All right, you're saying magazines, so you read something and you say, oh, well, that sounds like it's a plan of action for me, and so on. Do you have any recommendation? How do we find out more about individual? Is it going up on Google? What, getting recommendations from individual people? How do we go about doing this?
Well, I guess that was why we created the organization Seek Safely, because we thought that the general public, first of all, is unaware of the fact that this is an unregulated $11 billion industry with no licensing, no credentialing, and no oversight. So the consumer has to be that much more aware of what they're consuming. We also decided to see what we could do to impact some sort of ethical and safety practices in the industry. But the individual needs to really be aware and pay attention to what it is they're looking for. What vulnerabilities do I have? Am I looking for something at this point in my life where I'm very fragile and vulnerable and open to suggestibility? We need to be aware of that. We need to understand that about ourselves and then ask lots of questions. So we've put together an empowerment guide for consumers to look at what might be potential red flags. And we've created a promise that we're asking the practitioner, the person who's out there dispensing help and advice, to sign, as Kathleen mentioned, to make a public statement of intent. I intend to practice in an ethical and safe way, and I'm going to strive to live what I teach.
It's interesting to me. I think that the world right now is looking for very simple answers to very complex problems, and no one wants to take the time to pause and reflect and think critically. Maybe you say something that resonates with me. As Ginny says, I have to look inside myself and say, why does that resonate with me? Well, let me do a little investigation on this person and find out, why are they saying those things, and is this a credible source? But we don't do that. We just kind of move very quickly and go, oh, well, she's on Oprah, so it must be true. Or I read it on Google, it must be true. And so really trying to encourage people to slow down a little bit, do a little bit of critical thinking on some of these issues, which are just, they're important. I always say too, I think maybe the cultural taboo of not being allowed to acknowledge faith in our lives sometimes, I think, has left a void for people, and they're searching for something. They want to, this all has to mean something, trying to connect to something grander than themselves. And so these quick hits that are culturally acceptable, and so we just take them quickly and try to embrace them in our lives without just taking a breath and thinking it through a little bit.
Actually, as you say that, I think about, because we talk about, 60-second commercials, and everything is going so fast in our life, and not doing maybe necessarily in-depth reading on topics. We might use, our iPhone and try to figure out quickly within 2 paragraphs whether something is about what we want. I mean, so what you're saying is we really need to kind of stop that and really do much more investigation as to where we're going.
If we're going to build our life philosophy around it. It might be sort of interesting, read it, go, oh, that sounds sort of interesting, and move on. But if you're going to embrace something as a truth, do a little homework on it and make sure it is in fact a truth and not just someone's opinion.
So when you say you have a site, I know you have a mission statement, and then you have a worksheet kind of for people to think about if they're going off in a direction, just some questions that one should ask themselves.
Right. Well, the organization, our mission is really to educate the public about the fact that this is an industry that's unregulated, just to create that kind of awareness, and also to empower the person who's consuming, the seeker, to be more discerning, to ask more questions. So we have a guide on the site for people to sort of check out and look at, to ask more questions. And then the third part of our mission is to promote ethical and safe practices in the industry. So we're doing meetings across the country with providers and consumers to talk about ethics and safety, to kind of raise the issue. I'm trying to give talks in places where
well, that's
I
why I
can.
had you on my program, because I think this is a good way to alert everyone to could be a problem if you really don't know where you're going exactly with this. So so you kind of travel around the country.
Yes, we did a summit out in Sedona last year. We'll be doing another one in Southern California in September. I'm hoping to set something up here on the East Coast to gather people together for this discussion, and then to just bring awareness, just to create awareness.
So do we need to do something? We talked about experts and non-experts and so on. Do we need to do something legislatively or certify? I mean, we in Albany certify medical professionals, we certify nurse practitioners, we certify a lot of people. We did marriage counselors more recently because we were finding actually people who were social workers giving marriage assistance. We're finding people would just put up a sign saying, I'm a marriage counselor. And we have people put up a sign that say, I can give you legal advice for immigration, and they don't know a thing, and then what they do is just take your money. And so we keep trying to get to the industries that we're finding we need to regulate. Now, a lot of people say we shouldn't regulate everything, but do we need to kind of look in that direction? I don't exactly know how we go with this because it kind of covers a lot of different industries.
It does. I think one potential thing that might be, to me, seems pretty simple. If you're going to have a physically challenging event, you should require some information about a person's health history, number one. So that
the people that are going to the event.
Yeah, so that you can know whether or not it's safe for them to participate. And that there should be some basic possibly medical support available. Just as, you know, right now, if you go to a Little League game, there's an EMT on the sideline. If you go to a
village fair,
10K,
you have the ambulance corps right there.
Right.
Yes.
So if you're going to do a physically challenging event, there should be medical support available. To me, that seems pretty common sense. If you're going to sign a waiver, maybe you should be shown the risk management plan. Maybe you should know as the consumer what the person is going to do to minimize your risk. You're assuming that they're going to minimize your risk, but what we know is that that's not necessarily true.
Right. I'm just thinking about those, I mean, many times you go out, well, actually companies do this a lot, where they go out into a forest or woods or whatever, and it's like team playing and trying to build leadership skills, the same kind of thing, I guess. And then the question is, what responsibility, the people running it, what are their real responsibilities to the public? And I guess you can go on and talk about a lot of other areas where we do the
But you have to
physical.
know those companies all have risk management departments, so they're watching that, and I'm sure they've got lawyers on staff. They're making sure that those things they have the proper precautions and all of that, I think.
So in this case, you don't think necessarily that one of these, I kind of call him a guru. I don't know whether that's the right term or not, but would they have had that kind of support system behind them at all, with, you know, covering any kind of, I mean, you had the worst tragedy, but somebody could be hurt, and, you know, what, you know, do you sign off on any kind of
well, claims? The waivers indemnify the provider. So part of the difficulty is that people have been hurt from self-help kinds of events for many years, but they don't think they have recourse if they've been harmed. And if they've been psychologically harmed, which often happens, that's also a hard thing to prove.
Right.
So they have no place to go to lodge a complaint. And we've also learned that when people are harmed, they're embarrassed. because they've been scammed, and maybe they've been hurt emotionally, but lots of times they've lost money, and so they feel uncomfortable, they feel foolish, and they just want to get on with their life and forget that this ever happened. So there's not a lot of reporting when people have been harmed. So that's another area, and I'm not sure what the answer to that is.
Well, that's interesting because, often, if a restaurant doesn't provide good meals or something, you'll see little websites that will say, the food was terrible, whatever. I'm trying to think, there are other instances where people comment about what's been done. Is there a place for people to go to fight? If you've decided to go on a trip to Arizona or a trip someplace for any kind of self-help, is there a place to go where they get any kind of information about what's happened from other people, to have a little bit of a knowledge? Or is that we don't have that yet?
I don't think that exists.
Not that I'm aware of.
It's a great idea.
Not that I'm aware of.
Right, because we really, that would be a way to start. We have it. If you have an illness, you go up and there's a chat room all over the place, and you don't necessarily pay attention to everything that people say, but sometimes people will say things that really give you, something to think about, which is great. I don't know whether we do this with colleges. We probably do. So why don't we,
I suppose because it's such a personalized thing, and there are different therapists and coaches that you might not like me, we might not get along. That doesn't mean I'm a bad coach. It may just mean that that's not the right fit. Right. And so I think it's
I think
a little
part
more
of
personalized.
There's also a psychological component here that can wind up being pretty manipulative in terms of people even evaluating their own experience. And I just think this is complicated, but people don't have a place to go. And we, in creating our organization, we didn't want to be set up as, we're going to be the witch hunters and we're going to, rout out the scammers, because seeking help and growing and learning is great. That's a great thing to do. I don't want to discourage people from doing that, and I don't want them to just say, oh, this is bad, stay away from this, because there are a lot of people out there that are terrific. And just because they're operating outside of traditional modalities doesn't mean that they can't be tremendously helpful to someone. So we were stuck with this dilemma of how to tell this negative story in a positive way, where you're simply asking people, ask more questions, just be more aware, have that open heart to learn and to grow, but keep your eyes open too.
Right. So I guess you just shouldn't jump into it the week you hear about it. Say, oh, I'm going there, within a week. I think you really have to. And you have to be aware of certain things, like, the whole group experience. When you go to an event where a lot of people are present, there's a group psychology that takes place that kind of maybe propels you to do something that maybe you wouldn't have done on your own. Maybe it's a good thing to go with a friend so that you can check each other out, to make sure that yeah, this is in fact something that would be good for us to do. So I think there are some simple things. People need to understand sensory deprivation. I don't think my daughter understood that. She didn't sleep for 4 days. Of course she wasn't thinking clearly and rationally towards the end of that event. Now, what caused was that a part of the program? They were encouraged not to sleep. They were encouraged to stay up through the night and to journal. The very heavily packed schedule, which is another red flag that people need to pay attention to. If your own bodily needs aren't being honored, you should step back and question that. So maybe you have to know ahead of time, exactly what the program is. Did they really give total information? Do you recall about what it was going to be like? No. Exactly. And we know often that people get information in a waiver, but they don't really read it. It's 20 pages long, and you can't show up unless you sign it. So this is something you want to do, and you sign it, and you don't read all the fine print. So that's also part of the problem. One of the cores of coaching, we always tell people, approach life with curiosity. So again, it's never saying the gurus are wrong or they're all out to get people, but
where do they come from? What are their credentials? How is it that they get to be standing in front of you, being the guru? What do they know? What do they have to offer you? So ask all of those questions, and then again, if you get that ick feeling, there's no other way to describe that. You have to back off a little bit, and as my mother used to tell me when I was a kid, always consider the source. What's their agenda? What's in it for them? That's a fair question. Someone should always be asking me that question as their coach. What's in it for you? And I will always disclose that and be as open as I can. And then they have to decide, is this the right fit?
So what do you do when your child, if your child is younger, obviously parents can be much more involved in those decisions, right? And as you get an adult child, it's a little harder. And do you have any advice? What does maybe I relate a little bit to we're having such a problem with drug use, which is a little different, but it is hard when your child is an adult. There's this little difference. And
definitely.
Yeah.
It strikes. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Kirby was pretty independent from the time she was very young, so would have been difficult. I think I might have been able to have a little more influence if I had known more of exactly what she was going into, just to have a discussion with her. Because even if she went, if you discuss things ahead of time with someone, to just have them be conscious and aware, maybe when they're in this situation, they'll remember some of that conversation. I can't make them do what I would like them to do. I learned that a long time ago.
Right.
But I think having more information ourselves and sharing that information and just saying, why don't you take a look at this? Why don't you go to that website and just check out what they're saying about what you're entitled to and what are the things you need to look out for. Maybe that would be enough to help them.
I also think this is a generation, too, where you want to ask instead of tell. So rather than say, oh, that's a silly idea, don't do this, here's information I found, ask them a question. Well, why do you think that this is a good thing? And tell me more about what it is you're looking for. Because if you immediately give it the kibosh, then that makes it more attractive.
Right.
Whereas, so just never tell them it's a bad idea. Just kind of ask them enough questions so that they can think about things in that critical way that maybe, and I'm sure Kirby did think critically, even that doesn't work all of the time. But I think that's particularly with the high school and middle-aged school children, we've got to ask. To help them think.
So how can, I know you have websites or places to go, can we tell our audience where they can find some more information?
That's right. So our website is seeksafely.org. So people can go on the website. There's lots of information, lots of blogs, articles, things that we've come across, just to give people more information, ask more questions, consult with people that maybe have looked at this a little bit more critically. We have a lot of information from Dr. Norcross, for example, who has written the book Changeology, talking about what is the science of change. It isn't just I think my way into change, or I think my way into a great life. But there are skills that I need to learn and a readiness that I have to have in order to make change in my life.
Right.
And I can be reached at careerplanners.net. And I would always say to folks, if they are thinking of hiring a life coach, they want to make sure that they're certified by the International Federation of Coaches. And so that's a governing body. It's a not-for-profit that has a code of ethics that in order to be a member, you've got to be willing to have that continuing education and sign off on that code of ethics. And without that, then there's, there's some ramifications. So
thank you so much, Kathleen. Thank you, Ginny, so much.
You're welcome.
And thank you all for watching. And again, just be cautious. We want to promote self-help, but just be very cautious. Thank you very much for watching. Any questions, call me at my office, 914-941-1111. Thank you very much.